What could Lady Louise, the quiet royal shadowed by her family's legacy, have possibly written that left Prince Edward, her father, staring blankly, unable to speak? Sources claim the diary entry was discovered accidentally, and its contents weren't just personal. They were explosive, whispers of betrayal, allegiance, and a hidden truth about the monarchy's future are now turning corridors of the palace ice cold with fear. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began not with a scream, but with silence. Prince Edward, known for his measured calm and ability to stay out of the fiercest royal crossfires, was found in his daughter's study stone still, white-knuckled and clutching a leather-bound diary as if it were a ticking device. This wasn't a planned reading, nor was it an intrusion. It was, by every account, a moment of accident or perhaps fate. Lady Louise had left it open just enough for a few lines to peer out like ghosts demanding to be read. And Edward read. And then he stopped speaking. The palace staff had never seen him like this. Not when his mother passed, not during Charles and Camilla's rise, not even when his own royal status was called into question behind closed doors. But this, his daughter's words, pierced deeper than the protocol-laced wounds of the crown ever could. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a revelation. A slow-burning, meticulously written confession that revealed not only her emotional turmoil, but an undeniable fracture forming beneath the surface of the royal family. In ink and fury, she detailed her agony over being silenced, minimized, and left to watch the monarchy she was born into twist into something unrecognizable. The diary wasn't a daily journal of mundane life. It was a ledger of royal sins, a hidden archive of observations, grievances, and most damning of all, a vow. Tucked between entries of emotional confessions were lines so severe that aides who later read them described the atmosphere as Arctic. In one passage, she wrote of watching her father stand motionless while wolves fed, a line believed to reference his quiet acceptance of Camilla's growing dominance within the royal household. Another section referenced a pact forged in silence with someone she described as the rightful light in this house of mirrors, a phrase now heavily speculated to mean Princess Catherine. This wasn't just about feeling unseen, it was about witnessing betrayal and choosing sides. Louise did not hold back. She questioned her father's loyalty, his failure to shield her from political manipulation, and his role in the palace's descent into what she labeled a gilded lie. The most haunting line? There is a truth the crown will choke on if ever revealed. And that line, insiders claim, is what broke Edward. It wasn't merely the words, it was the weight of what he now had to protect, or perhaps expose. The leak of the diary, which palace aides insist was never meant for public release, only added to the gravity. Speculation now grows that someone inside the royal circle deliberately allowed the pages to surface, either to warn or to ignite. The timing, coinciding with mounting pressure on Queen Camilla and internal disputes about the future role of younger royals, has many convinced this was no accident, it was a message. And the message was clear. Lady Louise was no longer content with silence, but to understand why this single diary entry could ignite a royal firestorm, we must step back into the hidden corridors where trust was shattered and silent alliances were born. Behind Prince Edward's quiet demeanor lies a man who's seen fractures grow in silence. For decades, he kept the monarchy's wounds behind velvet curtains, but did his silence cost him his daughter's trust? In a family where loyalty is measured not by love but by restraint, Edward carved out a role as the royal buffer. While others clashed behind castle walls and tabloids lit up with scandal, he held the line of decorum. But that line, clean, quiet, unshaken, came at a cost. He became the man who nodded through decisions he disagreed with, who chose peace over power, and who watched as those he cared for were edged out, overlooked, or outplayed. His refusal to confront Camilla's growing hold over royal influence wasn't cowardice, it was calculation. But in doing so, he created a silence so loud, his own daughter mistook it for betrayal. Lady Louise watched him closely, not as a critic, but as a daughter desperate for a signal that her father still stood for something. But as Camilla's image was hoisted higher and higher, as Catherine was sidelined in subtle but cruel ways, as the older guard looked the other way, Edward said nothing. Not at dinner. Not in private meetings. Not when Louise asked, "Why does no one stop this?" His silence wasn't just noticeable, it became a defining presence in their lives. And within the halls of Bagshot Park, even the clinking of silverware couldn't cover the quiet distance growing between father and daughter. What the public never saw were the letters, private, handwritten appeals from Edward to his mother, Queen Elizabeth, urging her to mend the widening divide in the family. Pleas that warned of competing influences and a fracturing future if the monarchy continued on its current path. But they were tucked away, too little, too late, unread, until it was safe to read them without consequence. Edward had hoped to protect his family, to shield Louise from the storm, but instead, she grew up in the eye of it, watching everything while being told to pretend it wasn't happening. He never imagined his refusal to act would push her to act alone, that in his effort to insulate her, he'd only inspired to document every quiet injustice in ink, the same ink that would one day spell out everything he failed to say. He thought he was preserving stability, but to Louise, he was preserving a system that was slowly devouring the people who mattered most. His silence, once considered noble, now echoed as complicity in the pages of a diary that would bring him to his knees. And while Edward stayed silent, Lady Louise took pen to paper, crafting her own reckoning within the pages of her secret diary. Lady Louise Windsor was never meant to lead, but history has a strange way of choosing its rebels. What started as observation turned into defiance, and her diary entries prove she was silently documenting every betrayal she witnessed. From the earliest days, Louise knew her place not by choice, but by design. Born into a lineage where spotlight and silence warred for dominance, she grew up watching others claim stages she was never invited to stand on. She was the quiet royal, the unspoken daughter of a lesser prince, tucked neatly behind palace traditions and titles that never truly embraced her. But obscurity did something to her, it sharpened her senses. While others performed their roles, she observed with unblinking clarity, reading between lines not written for her, and hearing whispers never meant to reach her ears. The monarchy underestimated her, thinking invisibility meant irrelevance. It didn't. It meant freedom to see everything without being seen at all. As Queen Camilla's influence tightened its grip on royal affairs, Louise felt her world shifting into something unfamiliar and cold. The family she once believed was anchored in duty, and history now felt compromised, contorted by personal agendas masked as public service. While her father faded into diplomatic quiet, Louise's unease turned into a quiet fury. What stung wasn't just the rise of Camilla, but the retreat of those who should have stood firm. It was watching her family bow not to service but to survival, and she began writing, not in rebellion but in record, a private chronicle of everything the crown tried to deny. It was Prince Philip who first warned her. In hushed walks through Windsor's hidden corners, he spoke in guarded tones about the cost of legacy and the danger of ambition. He never named names, but the shadows in his voice said enough. "You'll have to decide one day whether you belong to the blood or the truth," he once said. Those words never left her, and after his passing she sought out the few remaining allies who hadn't yet given themselves fully to the new order. Princess Anne, stoic and sharp, met her behind closed doors. Catherine, graceful yet burdened, became a quiet confidant. These were not royal events. They were moments of shared disappointment, of unspoken understanding that something sacred was being dismantled piece by piece. Louise also began noticing the quiet exclusion at family functions, the way her name was often last, her title barely uttered. See. Conversations with cousins turned awkward, strained by comparison and veiled envy. The deeper she sank into the margins of the royal structure, the more she realized neutrality was a myth. You either allowed the erosion, or you tried to stop it. There was no middle ground. The diary became her sword. Every entry, a refusal to be complicit. Every page, a protest in ink. She didn't write to remember, she wrote to resist. Her silence had always been mistaken for obedience. In truth, it had been preparation. But it wasn't just about observation. Louise's diary reveals decisions made in the dark, including a vow that would forever change her relationship with the House of Windsor. Buried deep within her journal was a chilling declaration. Lady Louise had pledged loyalty not to the reigning Queen Camilla, but to Catherine, Princess of Wales. It wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. In a family torn between allegiance and ambition, Lady Louise made a choice that would mark the beginning of a quiet revolution. Her admiration for Catherine had long simmered beneath the surface respect not born of titles, but of resilience. While others bowed and yielded, Catherine endured. Scandals, smears, subtle attempts to sideline her, none of it broke her. And for Louise, that strength didn't just inspire, it compelled. The diary's most electrifying chapter, titled My True Queen, lays bare the emotional clarity behind her decision. It wasn't a rebellion for attention. It was a deliberate shift of loyalty toward the only woman she believed could restore honor to a monarchy veering off course. That decision, however, was not made in isolation. Sources reveal that weeks before the entry was written, Louise and Catherine shared a private conversation in the secluded gardens of Balmoral. What was said remains locked behind royal lips, but Louise's tone changed after that. The pages that follow are laced with coded language and cryptic metaphors, references to a mother of integrity, a crown of conscience, and children born for more than ceremony. Analysts believe these are veiled allusions to Catherine and her children, specifically George and Charlotte, whom Louise saw as symbolic heirs to a purer future. She wrote about safeguarding their paths, hinting at subtle ways she'd begun feeding information to those loyal to Catherine's household. What began as observation soon evolved into quiet action. Louise documented how she intercepted whispers, redirected staff loyalties, and slipped critical updates to Catherine's inner circle through trusted channels. These weren't espionage tactics. They were survival strategies in a court where influence was currency and silence was lethal. The more Louise leaned into her clandestine alliance, the more aggressively Camilla's circle began to edge her out. Invitations vanished. Portraits were quietly removed. Her name was left off ceremonial rosters. It was as though someone in power had issued a silent order: erase her. Louise didn't lynch. In fact, she wrote that their attempts to silence her only confirmed everything she feared. The diary paints a picture of a royal household rotting from within, where loyalty is punished and truth is buried beneath curated headlines. And in the center of it all, Catherine stood alone, unprotected, yet unwavering. That image haunted Louise. It fueled her. And so she vowed not only to stand with her, but to ensure the next generation would inherit something worth defending. This wasn't just about affection or admiration, it was about salvation. Her words in My True Queen weren't poetry, they were prophecy. She wrote, "When the throne forgets who it serves, let it be shaken by those it casts aside," a line that now echoes through palace corridors like a warning. Because if Louise could see what was being hidden in plain sight, how many others were watching too? But alliances like these don't go unnoticed, especially not in a palace that thrives on silence and retaliation. Unbeknownst to Louise, her movements were being monitored. Camilla's private operatives had flagged the young royal as a potential disruptor. What they missed, however, was fatal to their plan. Inside the palace, surveillance isn't a theory, it's a tool. A silent web woven to maintain control, track allegiances, and silence dissent before it festers. And in recent years, with tensions quietly boiling beneath the surface, Queen Camilla's circle began deploying unofficial watchers. Their target wasn't public enemies or rogue outsiders, it was those within. Young royals who hadn't yet been fully absorbed into the new order. Lady Louise, quiet but calculating, fit the profile of someone too observant for comfort. The whisper went out, "Keep an eye on her." And so they did, but they underestimated her completely. Louise wasn't naive. She sensed the shifting air around her. Loyal staff began being reassigned without explanation. A once trusted aide suddenly hesitated before answering simple questions. Even messages that once flowed freely between her and Catherine's team were being delayed or redirected. What Camilla's operatives didn't realize was that Louise had her own circle, older Windsor staff, fiercely loyal to the Queen's bloodline, who quietly alerted her to the surveillance net tightening around her. Instead of panicking, Louise adjusted. She began writing in code, using phrasing lifted from historical texts, diary entries disguised as harmless notes, and letters that appeared trivial but carried layers of meaning. She wasn't just reacting, she was maneuvering. One intercepted letter believed to have contained sensitive commentary about Camilla's strategic removal of key allies from royal functions triggered a response that nearly exposed the entire operation. According to insiders, the letter never reached its destination. Instead, it was intercepted and redirected. But what followed next set off a chain reaction. A Windsor butler, suspicious of a Camilla aide's presence, a restricted mailroom, confronted him. The altercation was brief, but heated enough to cause an internal review. Louise, ever the strategist, immediately changed her communication patterns, switching to verbal exchanges, using trusted drivers to deliver messages, and writing only on pages she could destroy if necessary. Then, something inexplicable happened. The night Louise's diary disappeared before it resurfaced in Edward's hands, the surveillance logs went dark. Entire entries wiped. Audio files deleted, motion trackers frozen. Whatever they had been monitoring, whoever had accessed her room, the digital fingerprints were gone. The system had either been bypassed, or someone from the inside had chosen to erase it all. That was the moment Camilla's network began to fracture. The Watchers were no longer in control. Their target had turned the trap on its head. It was no longer just a matter of observing Lady Louise, it had become a game of survival. The young royal had outmaneuvered the palace machinery built to suppress her. Her silence had never been passive, it had been tactical. And now, just as the operatives scrambled to re-establish control, the damage was already done. What they feared most wasn't that Louise had something to say, it was that someone might finally listen. And while Camilla's network unraveled, Prince Edward was about to uncover the very pages that would break his silence and his heart. Imagine being a father reading for the first time your daughter's heartbreak laid bare her doubts, her fury, her rejection of everything you thought you protected her from. For Edward, the silence that followed was louder than any royal decree. It happened during what should have been an ordinary visit. Prince Edward arrived unannounced at his daughter's residence, a quiet check-in routine, benign, or so he thought. Louise wasn't home. Her staff had stepped out. The room was still, untouched. But then, on the edge of her writing desk, left open as if fate had orchestrated the moment, sat the journal. At first, Edward hesitated, but curiosity gave way to instinct, and the words on that page were not meant to be read casually. They were a cry buried beneath years of royal silence, finally clawing its way into daylight. The entry was titled "To the Man Who Stayed Silent," and once Edward began reading, he could not stop. The words were raw, unflinching. His daughter spoke not as a royal, but as a young woman unraveling the myth of her own family. She wrote of watching her father, her hero, stand still while others advanced, retreating from battles she wished he'd fought. "You stood by while wolves fed," she wrote. "And when I looked for your shield, all I saw was your shadow." It wasn't just criticism, it was devastation carved into ink. Every paragraph stripped away the illusion Edward had held that his silence was a form of protection. To Louise, it was abandonment. She wrote about feeling invisible, present, but peripheral. A witness to power play. She was never part of, and a pawn in a game she never agreed to join. She described the unbearable confusion of loyalty torn between family and truth, and how isolation had become her inheritance. Her voice shifted from wounded to awakened. It was the voice of someone who had stopped asking for a seat at the table and had started building her own. And as Edward read those pages, it wasn't anger he felt, it was collapse. A slow, internal shattering of everything he thought he had preserved by staying quiet. Behind locked doors that day, Edward wept. Staff who found him later said his eyes were red, his breathing uneven. He refused to speak for hours. That evening he made one call to Princess Anne. The call began with 6 words that changed everything. "She knows everything, she wrote it all." What followed has never been disclosed, but palace sources say Anne's expression that night was ashen, as if history had shifted. Because this wasn't just a daughter venting frustration, it was a damning reflection of a broken lineage. Louise hadn't just written about her father, She had documented a royal reckoning, one the palace could no longer ignore. But even grief can spark resolve, and Edward's next move would shake the family's foundation. What began in silence ended in fury. When Prince Edward confronted Lady Louise about her words, it wasn't anger that met him, but resolve. She didn't back down. She doubled down. The confrontation happened behind closed doors, away from the palace walls and press speculation, but its shockwaves would ripple through every branch of the royal tree. Inside Bagshot Park, a father came seeking answers not as a prince, but as a man wrecked by what he had read. He didn't come to accuse, he came to understand. But Louise, already carrying the weight of being unheard for too long, didn't flinch. What Edward hoped would be a moment of reconciliation swiftly turned into a collision of two worlds, his tethered to duty, hers tied to truth. He asked her, gently, almost pleadingly, if she meant what she wrote. She looked him in the eye and said, "Every word." Edward's voice was quiet, almost broken, begging her to consider the consequences. He asked her to retract the diary, to issue a statement clarifying the entry, to suggest she'd written it in a moment of emotional confusion. But Louise was calm, steady. She told him she wouldn't correct the truth just to protect an illusion. He reminded her of her future. She reminded him of his past. "You watched it fall apart and said nothing," she said. "Now you want me to stay silent too?" Every sentence hit like thunder. She wasn't screaming, she didn't have to. The power of her words wasn't in their volume. It was in their certainty. Then came the revelation that shattered whatever peace Edward had clung to. There was another diary, one he hadn't found, one she hadn't shared. It was, in her words, the one that held names, conversations, and what the Crown thinks it erased. Edward's face reportedly turned pale. He asked her where it was. She said it was safe, and that if anything happened to her, it would no longer be private. She had prepared for this moment. She had outgrown being protected by a father who failed to protect himself. In that tense exchange, something irreversible happened. Louise looked at him not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman delivering a verdict. "If you won't protect the legacy," she told him, "I will." That sentence, spoken not in defiance, but in determination, cut deeper than anything she had written. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. For a long moment there was silence again, but this time it was heavy, final. Edward, staring at the daughter he no longer recognized but couldn't help admiring, whispered only one thing before leaving the room: "I failed you." But the royal family hadn't heard the last from Louise, because her next move was not a whisper, but a decal. Oration. Hours after the confrontation, a confidential audio recording began circulating among palace aides, Louise speaking into a recorder, narrating her truth. The leak? Intentional. The message? Unmistakable. It was just past midnight when the first whispers began. A voice memo, clear, poised, and devastating, was forwarded across encrypted channels within the palace. It wasn't anonymous. It didn't hide behind protocol. It was Lady Louise, her voice calm but edged with fire, recounting everything that had driven her to the brink. This was no nervous confession, it was a manifesto. She began by describing the moment she realized her identity was being reshaped not by her choices, but by the hands of a palace trying to contain her. "Before the Crown defines me," she said, "I will define myself." The room went silent for those who heard it, because in that single sentence, centuries of quiet compliance shattered. What followed was even more unexpected. Louise didn't just speak for herself, she spoke to the others, the forgotten, the diminished. "To my cousins," she said directly, "you are not alone. You never were. You just weren't being seen." It was a line that sent shivers down the corridors of royal residences. The press didn't have it yet, but those inside the institution knew the floodgates were weakening. Louise's words weren't written in secrecy this time. They were broadcast, deliberately, so no one could claim they didn't know. She called out those who performed loyalty. Without question, those who, in her words, had become decorated puppets in gilded rooms. No names were mentioned, but none needed to be. Everyone knew who she meant. Camilla's inner circle went into panic. Aides rushed to trace the origin of the leak. Phones were confiscated, staff interrogated, clearance levels rechecked. Still, they found nothing. Because the recording hadn't been stolen. It had been placed strategically by someone who wanted it heard. And the palace's silence only deepened the chaos. For the first time, the public persona of unity began to visibly crack. Louise had pierced the illusion. And she hadn't done it with rebellion. She'd done it with clarity, control, and timing. The final line of the recording would be the most quoted phrase in the weeks to come. After nearly 5 minutes of unbroken truth, Louise closed with 6 words that changed everything. "They've read my words. Now they'll hear my voice." It wasn't a threat. It was a reckoning. One that even the monarchy's most seasoned defenders couldn't spin away. Because it wasn't just about what she'd said, it was about who she'd become. No longer the overlooked royal, Louise had stepped into her power without ever stepping into a spotlight. But just when the storm seemed to peak, a final twist emerged, one no one saw coming. Not even Louise herself. There was another diary, one Louise never meant for the palace to find. Locked in a coded box, it was reportedly handed directly to Catherine in a late-night visit. What it contained left the Princess of Wales in stunned silence. Unlike the first diary, which chronicled betrayal, heartbreak, and a growing storm within the House of Windsor, this second volume was different. It was not a confession, it was a blueprint. Pages filled not with grief but with vision. Louise had written it as a guide. A royal manifesto meant not for scandal but survival, crafted for the next generation of royals who would inherit a kingdom still trembling beneath the weight of unspoken truths. This was her legacy, stripped of titles, free from protocol, intended for George, Charlotte, and Louis. She offered them advice, raw, sincere, and piercing. How to detect manipulation cloaked as tradition. When to walk away from hollow praise. And most importantly, how to wear the crown without letting it wear them down. In a section marked, "If it ever comes to you," she addressed George directly. Not as a future king, but as a boy who would be taught to sacrifice privacy, emotion, and authenticity for the sake of optics. She warned him of the palace traps, the smiling courtiers who work for cameras, not convictions. She wrote that power without purpose is poison, and that if he wanted to lead, he must lead with humility and not fear. For Charlotte, she urged her to protect her voice, because they would try to reduce her to roles, to ribbons and smiles, to appearances that please, not power that commands. And to Louis, the youngest, she simply wrote, "Never let the silence define you. Speak, even when they tell you not to." But there was more names. Louise listed individuals who she claimed should never wear a crown, not because of lineage, but because of loyalty. Names that Catherine read and reportedly said left her unable to sleep that night. One palace source said she sat alone with the diary for over 2 hours, and when she finally closed it, she said quietly, "She understands more than we ever did." That diary to this day is said to be locked in a private vault accessible only to Catherine, guarded not by protocol but by trust. No official acknowledgement has ever been made, but the whisper of its existence now dances through every corridor, echoing in every decision made behind those palace doors. And so, Lady Louise, once the forgotten royal, became the voice that echoed through the walls of monarchy, louder than any crown ever wore. RN, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.